10 random Magic cards rated, day 191. This is actually my third attempt at this because the first time I didn't realize I wasn't recording and I got like 3 cards in. One of them was Wild Growth, and I love Wild Growth, and I wanted to give it like a super high score and see what you guys thought about it, but I wasn't recording it, so I couldn't upload it to the internet. The second time I tried to record this, the first 4 cards were all like lands, or basic lands, or cards we've done before. So I trashed the recording. So let's see. Drum roll, please. First card of the day, for real this time, is Mask of Memory. Never seen this on the series before. This is originally printed in Mirrodin. It's 2 mana for an equipment. It equips for just 1 mana. Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw 2 cards. If you do, discard a card from your hand. 2 cards? Really? That's pretty good. What's wrong with that, man? I think this is actually kind of sick. 2 mana to play isn't much. 1 to equip is not much. And obviously, you throw it on like an unblockable thing. You then profit from that decision having been made. This is still like 40 cents to buy, which is not expensive by any means, but you know, there are plenty of random commons or uncommons from Mirrodin that are still like 10 cents. So somebody out there is doing something with it from time to time. Again, especially unblockable commanders and in Tetsuya Yumezawa decks, I think it's called. You know, all your unblockable or all your like 1 power or toughness creatures are unblockable. That guy seems fantastic. So I actually really like this a good bit. It's slightly narrow, but not even that narrow when you really, I mean, you're attacking with creatures in most Magic decks. So I'm going to give this a 4.74. I actually think this is kind of a gem in some ways. But let's move on to Embrace the Unknown. I don't know what this card does, but let's embrace that. Really cool art. That's extremely intimidating, but this guy, he's fine with it. Giant wolf tornadoes, big deal. I'd probably try to run from that. 3 mana, 2 and a red for a sorcery. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. This divination in red has retrace, so you can cast it from your graveyard by discarding a land in addition to paying its other cost. Well, it's kind of at odds with itself, right? You need a bunch of lands. I think a lot of the time when you're drawing 2 cards this way, you probably are going to have to wait until the next turn to cast them unless you have a lot of mana. And even if you have enough mana, you know, the rest of your turn is spent casting one of them and you can't cast the other or whatever. So you probably do want lands. You don't want to discard all your lands. But I will say, you know, divination, sort of, that you can play multiple times in a game, that does seem pretty tempting. This is card advantage, you know, maybe 3 times. You're paying mana for it every time, but still, this is card advantage multiple times. It's a good, like, mana sink in some ways, you know, turns where you need something to do with your extra mana. But it also, again, let me go back to this, it also deprives you of extra mana because you're discarding your lands, or who knows, maybe you want to discard your lands, right? Maybe your Life from the Loaming or Splendid Reclamation, Aftermath Analyst, you know. So maybe you want your Crucible of Worlds. Effectively nullifies the downside of retracing this card. So, you know, there's tricks with it, I'm sure. I actually think it's pretty good. I actually do think that a divination you can play 4 times in the same game of Magic is pretty tempting. So I'm going to give Embrace. I will embrace it, as a matter of fact. 5.7. And that sounds high, but again, I think that it's actually better than it probably looks to some people. Retrace is a good ability. It just is. Fathom Fleet Firebrand is up next. Originally from Ixalan. She looks cool on both versions of the card. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 2/2 human pirate. 1 and a red. It gets +1/+0 till end of turn. So not super exciting, right? 2 mana, slow fire breathing, like expensive fire breathing. You know what I mean? Not great. 2 decent creature types, I guess, but altogether not very good. So let's just go 2.4 on this. Well, no, let's go 2.6 on this little lady. You actually kind of weirdly still to this day don't see all of the 2 mana 2/2s in red. There's a whole backstory with that. You know, we used to play Ironclaw Orcs. That card was horrible. It's a 2 mana 2 power creature in red, and we just didn't have access to a ton of those. But next is Palace Siege. I like the sieges just in general. This one from Fate Reforged. 5 mana, 3 and 2 black for an enchantment. As Palace Siege enters the battlefield, choose cons or dragons. Cons. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Dragons. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. Pretty sick, actually. 5 mana is a bit much to pay for the enchantment. And I think that some stuff like Painful Quandary or even Grievous Wound, when it comes to these polluted bonds, these 5 mana black enchantments that are just kind of goofy and they force decisions on the opponent and stuff like that. Punish them in some way. I think this isn't like super high on the totem pole, right? But all that said, I do think that like getting to cast Raise Dead for free every turn is like pretty frustrating for a lot of players. Like maybe they had the removal for the thing last turn, or they're going to have it this turn and the turn after that and the turn after that. So I like that. And then like if you can find a way, if you need to later on, to like blink it or something like that, return it to your hand, play it again, then you can switch it over to the other mode when everyone's at like a reasonably low life total. And that seems like a fun mode too. So I think this, just like the other sieges, I think this definitely has its place in these sort of like mid-rangey commander decks. I'm just going to play some good 5-drops, see where that takes me. So it's still like $1 to buy too. Someone's playing it. I'm going to give this card a 6.1. I think that it's pretty playable. It's a form of card advantage that you definitely want like every single turn. That's not bad. Hedonist Trove from Dragons of Tarkir is up next. 7 mana for this. A lot of mana. 7 mana, 5 and 2 black for an enchantment. When Trove enters the battlefield, exile all cards from target opponent's graveyard. You may play land cards exiled with Trove. You may cast non-land cards exiled with Trove. You can't cast more than 1 spell this way each turn. Also note that it doesn't say that you can cast them using any color mana. You have to actually pay their mana costs, even if you have to find a way to do it with treasure tokens or something like that. Altogether a neat card, but 7 mana is just an unbelievable amount of mana for this, and you can't really control what's in your opponent's graveyard, so kind of a flop here, I would say, a bit of a dud. Let's give this a 2 for, some potential value at times, I'm sure. And maybe I'm just way up. Maybe it's a 6 because like somebody sitting at the commander table has a stacked graveyard and it's just insane. But I actually don't think this is going to line up or be worth the 7 mana most of the time. Death's Shadow, really sick Secret Lair showdown version of it right here by Matt Steiker, I'm not sure. But a beautiful looking card. Originally printed in Worldwake, though. A single black mana for a 13/13 avatar. Death's Shadow gets -X/-X. X being your life total. It looks an awful lot like a Mind Flayer from Dungeons and Dragons. I've never really looked close enough at it to notice that, but one way or the other. A 1 black 13/13. Right. But the downside is so great that it will never see any competitive play, right? This thing ruled Modern for literally, it felt like years. You're always hearing about Death Shadow just crushing Modern events for like, I feel like a good solid 3 or 4 years there, really. But this card isn't what it used to be in that format, but it's still, present, I guess. This is a good Magic card. It's automatically not as good in Commander, obviously. It gets -40 on turn 1. You don't want that. All right, but for its competitive pedigree, I will give Death Shadow a 7.9, somewhere thereabouts. It did very well for a good long stretch there. Are you mad at me for 7.9? You guys thinking like 8 point something? I don't think so. I think it you got to do a lot to get this card to work, just like what would I give Delver? Well, what would I give Delver of Secrets? It's actually a good question. Okay, 8. I'll throw an 8 at it. So I'd probably give Delver like an 8.2, But anyway, next is Counterspell. Ooh. Next is Counterspell, originally printed in the long ago. Let me view all the prints so I can get like a real print of Counterspell. You got, this one looks nice. This one looks nice right there. A little Mystery Booster 2 printing. That's cool. There's so many printings of Counterspell. I'm guarantee I don't know what all of these even look like. You know what I mean? Like there's got to be, yep, there's another art I've never seen before. This one over here. I've never seen that in my life. It's pretty cute. It's beautiful art. But let's go down to the original Mark Pool joint. You have to next it. You have to next it. I don't think I've ever had to next a card on Scryfall before. The Bikini Counterspell that we all loved back in the day, of course. Because, you know, we're all teenagers. But yeah, Mark Pool. There he is. There's Marky Pool, baby. This is from a limited edition. Still $60. It's nuts. That's kind of dumb, honestly. Counterspell is, in case you don't know what this does, it counters a spell. 2 blue mana, counter target spell. Instant speed, obviously. This is banned in Historic, because otherwise, gross. That should give you the indication that they'll never, ever print this card into Standard. Ever. Not going to happen. You know, I've heard people speculate on and off for the last 15, 20 years, and we're not getting it back. Not in Standard. We'll get things like it, but not it. Still the OG, and not the best. You know, I think Force the Will is probably the best counterspell ever printed. But Counterspell is still somehow, to this day, on the short list. It's in like the top 5, you know? So I'm going to give Counterspell like a 9.2. You know, it gets a lot of points for being the OG. It gets a lot of points for still being as good as it is. Somehow a lot of cards have been power crept. Not Counterspell, man. Not Counterspell. I will legit give this card a 9.2. It's probably going to be the best thing we look at today. And as I've said before, I'm purposefully tempting fate. Next card is Black Lotus, right? Steel Artifact. It's actually Steel Artifact. You were printed in Antiquities? No. Okay, it was Alpha. It actually was Alpha. This is, it steals an artifact. I mean, this is back in the day when a lot of times cards just said what they did, right? Counterspell. Steal Artifact. Copy Enchantment. Really, copy Artifact back then. Yeah, Clone. It was mostly blue cards, wasn't it? It's, do this thing. Ancestral Recall. What is that? Draw 3? What do you mean draw 3? How does that mean draw 3? Either way, this is 2 and 2 blue for an aura that enchants an artifact. You control that artifact. That's it. That's the whole card. Could potentially actually be pretty cool, you know? Could do some fun stuff at a commander table. Just remember it exists is all I'm saying. But I'm going to give the card a 4.3, and I've surprised myself by saying that because I was originally going to give the card like a 3.5, and then I just kept going up. Because the more I think about it, the more I think stealing an artifact on the commander table is broken. Actually, I don't think it's that bad. We'll move on to Foot Soldiers from Portal over here. Pretty bad. 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 2/4. It's the whole card. 1.3 or thereabouts, I think it gets. And then Sharuum the Hegemon up next. Have we done this card before? Now I can't remember. You'd think I would remember Sharuum, right? This is 6 mana, 3, a white, a blue, and a black for a 5/5 legendary Sphinx with flying. When it comes into play, return an artifact card from your graveyard to play. Yeah, I think we have done this. Okay, so instead of doing a bonus card, what I'll do today is I will score this a 6.2, but we'll do a bonus card. How about that? And that'll be the last card of the day. But I will score this a 6.2. Obviously, Reanimator spell that brings an artifact back. That's also a 5/5 flyer. Good. Bring a Meteor Golem back. Seems fine. Just anything. A Portal to Phyrexia, right? A lot of stuff. There's a lot of good options, actually, for this. But final card of the day is Servo Exhibition. Kind of like a Gather the Townsfolk, but you get an artifact. So it's kind of better, right? This is originally printed in Kaladesh. 2 mana, 1 and a white for a sorcery. You get 2 1/1 Servo artifact creature tokens. That's 2 artifacts on the table, bub. The guy in the art, to me, right here, looks an awful lot like, especially the face he's kind of making is kind of funny. And he looks a bit like Eric from Internet Comment Etiquette, if anybody watches that channel. Sure, a lot of you do, because there's been a couple of ads that I've done that you guys have been like in the comment section like, hey, that was kind of like an Eric ad. So I know some of you know who I'm talking about, but either way, Servo Exhibition. Again, if you're better than like, depends on what deck we're in, but if you're better than like Gather the Townsfolk or Dragon Fodder or a card like it, then you're pretty freaking good. You know what I mean? Obviously things like, Resolute Reinforcements are good for their own reasons. You can blink a reinforcements, but, still a lot of decks want a high artifact count specifically, and Servo Exhibition is actually a pretty good way of helping you get there. I like Servo Schematic in some ways more and in some ways less, you know. Schematic is the one that it's an artifact that costs 2 mana. It gives you a 1/1 when it comes into play, a 1/1 Servo. So it gives you 2 artifacts, but it only gives you 1 body. However, when it leaves play or dies or whatever, when it goes in the graveyard, you get another Servo. So ultimately, it pays you 3 artifacts for 2 mana, and any deck can play it. Whereas this is only strictly, this one color aligned, and only ever gives you the 2 artifacts. But usually getting 2 bodies up front is better for most purposes. So I'm really going super deep on the cut here, making comparisons between different cards, but there's so many similar cards to this that I think you kind of sort of have to compare them all. But in a vacuum, a lot of these cards get a decent score, and Servo Exhibition's no different. I'll give this a 4.9, and I'm serious. I really am. I think that in some ways the fact that it gives you artifacts is pushing it in some decks. But that is all for today, everybody. I'll see you bright and early tomorrow. Who knows what day that'll be? I don't even know what it's. Friday when I started recording this, and I've already done 1 video, so this is Saturday's video, supposedly. I'll see you on Sunday. Days mean nothing. I love you. Bye.